Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Jim Foerster, certified consulting meteorologist and Forbes contributor. Jim, thanks so much for coming on. Hurricane Lee was certainly stunning meteorologists last week. So Jim, my first question to you is anything about this storm surprising you now? And can you tell us about the storm's path?
Good question, Brittany. There's been a lot of interesting things going on in the tropics this season. We've talked all summer about the incredible warmth in the water, some parts of the Atlantic, and that's one of the areas where the storm formed, and that fuel, if you will, allowed the storm to rapidly intensify from a very weak tropical system to a hurricane to a major hurricane in a very short period of time. Really quite explosive. It was in the middle of the ocean, so that was a good thing. So that didn't really surprise us. We expected it. The rate at which it happened kind of made us open our eyes a little bit, but again, it was kind of expected. In terms of the track, it's been pretty well forecasted. The challenge with a storm like this is always when it begins its curve north, which is very important to the United States, particularly. And the storm is made the curve. It's starting to go north, and that's a good sign. It's been pretty well forecasted by the models, given the fact it's still 2.5, 3 days away from landfall. A lot could still happen, but the curve is relatively expected, given some other stuff going on meteorologically over the U.S. And we're pretty high confidence in this track from this point forward.
The category of this storm has really fluctuated. At one point, it was a tropical storm, then it was a Category 2. It rapidly intensified to a Cat 5, and as you and I are talking right now, it's a Cat 3. One, does this have the potential to be really devastating? And two, we know that the category doesn't paint the whole picture, but does this Category 3 really worry you?
The fluctuation, I think people tend to get a little bit maybe fixated on the number. They hear it was a 5, now it's a 4, then it's a 3. So, if you're in a snowstorm and that all of a sudden they're forecasting 10 inches and then 3 inches and then 1 inch, the trend is down. People think the same thing with hurricanes, but there's so much more than just wind and the intensity of the wind gusts, which is primarily the driver of those classifications. The storm surge, the amount of it, where it hits the coast, it makes a huge difference. We saw that in Florida earlier this summer in a relatively sparse area. A lot of eastern Maine and that part of adjacent Canada is relatively sparse. If that were to shift a little bit and hit where more people live, it would obviously be strong. But the last thing that happens, Brittany, is as storms go from major hurricanes and they gradually weaken down to tropical storms, and then what we call extratropical, where they're just like low pressure areas, the wind field expands. It's just part of the evolution process. So as the storm weakens and approaches coastal areas, that those winds, those tropical storm force winds, which are, they can bring power lines down and trees down, they expand hundreds of miles out from the actual track center. So you've got to be careful with the number and the actual track, particularly with a storm like this that's going to have such a wide area of relatively strong winds for that part of the United States and Canada.
Another Forbes meteorologist last week said that the storm wasn't going to make landfall on the East Coast that we knew of at the time, but he still said, continue to check forecasts. As of now, does it look like it's going to make landfall? And if not, what areas are going to be affected by those wind fields that you were just describing?
Yeah, it looks right now, Brittany, like landfall. There's still, again, I just got done saying we don't want to fixate too much on a black line, but it looks like the extreme northeast coastal areas of Maine, right where Maine borders up against New Brunswick, Canada, that's looking to be the approximate area, and but the winds will expand all over Nova Scotia to the east of the storm. where it's very low-lying area, and then to the west through Maine, even eastern New Hampshire, even the Cape Cod area. So maybe not Boston itself, but the islands that stick out there will probably experience some winds. But we work with a lot of our utilities in the Northeast, and some of our outage prediction models are forecasting extremely high numbers in some portions, particularly of Maine. And again, that little bit of an uncertainty, even 30, 50 miles can make a huge difference. So particularly folks in Maine should be on alert for any shift that could bring just even a little stronger winds in there than we're anticipating. But the storm surge is going to be a big problem with this as well. It's been over the ocean for days, so it can build up that inertia and that storm and nothing to hold it back. There's no land between the storm and where it's going to hit, so it'll continue to churn up that water towards the coast.
Will that storm surge only be in the Maine area, or will that be down the East Coast?
Well, it depends. There's storm surge, but there's rip tides, rip currents south of it. Usually the waters are going out, so that might be the case more and down by New Hampshire, Boston, Cape Cod area. It'll be more rip tides than storm surge. But anything up in Maine, Bar Harbor, Portland, certainly Nova Scotia, the western part of Nova Scotia, where there aren't many people, but there are cities that are relatively isolated out there. It's not a populated area, so it's hard to get to. There could be some extended power outages in that area, and then again, Maine is not. There's not roads every mile that cross, so sometimes it's hard to get to places up in the mountains to get power lines, power restored. So I think there'll be some considerable interruption to the power grid, and there's mutual assistance as well up in that part of the country where the utilities in eastern Canada work with the utilities in the Northeast U.S. to exchange crews, if you will, and that's probably already going on. Because places like Connecticut and New York are not going to get affected, so they can help out their neighbors, if you will.
Sure. And for the people in Maine, A, when can they expect those extreme outages? And B, what advice would you have to help them prepare? What's that number one tip you have?
The first question, the stronger winds will start to arrive during the day Saturday. So Saturday morning, tropical storm force winds, so 35 miles an hour or stronger, will probably be, halfway through Maine. So late Friday night into early Saturday, things will pick up. It looks like the landfall itself will be sometime during the day Saturday. So the big message is, anytime there's a hurricane like this, you've got to prepare for the recovery. Your house might not get damaged. You might be fortunate, if you will, in that respect, but you got to expect multiple days of interruption. Maybe the stores are closed. Maybe the roads are not all passable, so you have to take a longer route to get somewhere that you want to get to, or you just can't get there. So having water and food are the two most important things in a survival kit. And then, of course, making sure that you've done what you can to stay online and stay connected so you can get updates about, your power coming back on, outages, news on potential new storms that might be coming in. So it's important to be able to stay connected while you're still recovering from the previous storm. But just hurricane survival kits are common in Hurricane Alley, if you will. But maybe places like Maine might not have them. If you got a generator, a good time to gas it up, those kind of common sense things. I don't think there's going to be, it's not my job to call it, but I don't think there's going to be mass evacuations. There's really no place, it's not going to be flooding rains like we saw in California. It's going to be relatively fast moving, which is very good news. So we're not seeing massive, days and days of flooding. So evacuating doesn't really make any sense. It's probably going to be hunker down and hope for the best.
You said at the very beginning of this conversation that a lot of interesting things have been seen this hurricane season. And as you and I are talking now, we're about halfway through the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. So is there anything we should be keeping our eye on as we enter this next half?
It peaks right on September 10th. So we're just a couple days after it. That means there's, half the season to go, obviously. We've already had 14 named storms, and that's the average for an entire year. So we were forecasting a higher than average year. Most sources were, and that is even through the updates in early June that we didn't bat an eye. And there's been 3 major hurricanes already, which is twice what we normally have by this time of year. So usually we don't get the third major hurricane till middle or late October. So here we are on September 13th, and we have had 3 of them. So it has surprised us in that way, because it's a bit of an anomaly. But most of what's happening was forecast by the experts here going into the season because of those warm temperatures. That was really the main thing that stood. Remember, we were talking back last spring. It was off the charts. It's cooled a little bit, but it lends itself well to major storm development, not necessarily landfall or anything like that, but major storms. And we have had major storms. Like I said, we're up to 3 major hurricanes, and it's going to be another one, I think, next week. So we have half the season to go, and we haven't really done much at all in the Gulf yet, outside of that one storm. So we got to keep an eye on things. There's lots of energy still out there, and a lot of the season still to go.
You're calling this an anomaly. It is a higher than average year. Will this become the new normal, do you think?
It's hard to make that leap based on a couple years. If you recall, after Katrina, I was working then, and there was a pretty doom and gloom forecast for hurricanes like Katrina in the Gulf. Was going to be and we haven't had one. Fortunately, like that. We've had some strong storms, and they're supposed to happen, but we tend to have short memories when it comes to these things. There are cycles. Water temperature cycles could definitely be affected by climate change. We have El Nino cycles, which have been with us for long periods of time, and this year we've got an El Nino, which is developing, kind of fighting with water temperatures that we've never seen. So some of these things, there's really no book that you can look up. We've just got to kind of experience it and then figure out if it's the new norm. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that. A lot can change a tropical season outlook, more than just, climate change factoring in.
Jim Foerster, thank you for your insights. I hope you join me again soon.
Well, thank you very much, Brittany. Glad to join you.